virtue of us working in housing and homeless services, that homelessness will never truly disappear. The economy will ebb and flow. We have household situations. For example, we have a lot of LGBTQ youth who are becoming homeless. They have to leave their house. So there's a lot of factors that play into homelessness. So we will never truly end homelessness, if that makes any sense. But what we can do is develop a system where we prevent homelessness first and foremost. And if it can't be, that homelessness is a situation where it's brief, rare, and non-recurring. So we will no longer see people who have been homeless for 20 plus years on the street anymore. The other thing I really like about the USICH definition about an end to homelessness is it also puts characteristics to what the systematic response is. So you have to be able to quickly identify and engage people. So this is referring to coordinated outreach. You have to intervene to prevent the loss of housing and divert people from entering the homeless service systems. If you have heard me speak before, you have heard me speak about the value of a very robust prevention and diversion system or component to your overall housing crisis response system. So this piece, we have seen it across the country, is not emphasized enough. Seattle right now is doing a really great job of trying to get a lot more awareness out there about the importance of prevention and diversion. And so this is, I think, a key piece to this whole entire system that every community is really trying to work on. And when homelessness does occur, we provide immediate access to shelter and crisis services. So the emphasis is always getting people into shelter where they are safe and getting them as quickly as possible into housing. So we are quickly addressing that housing crisis. So I wanted to talk a little bit, I've already mentioned several times, you're going to hear me say housing crisis response system. So I really wanted to differentiate that from two other things that we talk a lot about at THN. So you may hear us use the word community. And I understand that community is a very nebulous thing. It depends on who you're talking to. So for example, I box and I do martial arts at a gym here called Austin Boxing Babes. Those women are very much my martial arts and boxing community. However, when it comes to THN staff and us talking about what community means, we mean your city. So for those of you that don't know, I think most of you do because we mention it a lot, the Texas Balance of State Continuum of Care covers about 87% of Texas's landmass. So we work with a lot of communities or cities. So I think that's why it's important to really differentiate what that means. And then we also use Local Homeless Coalition a lot, or LHC. And LHC is a group of people who meet regularly to plan and coordinate housing and services, strategically use resources, evaluate performance, and conduct education activities to prevent and end homelessness. Sorry for those spelling errors. We voted on this, I believe last year, the COC board voted on this, so this is the actual Texas Balance of State Continuum of Care approved definition of what a local homeless coalition is. And we also have additional materials on kind of the deliverables or those activities that these groups are required to do in order to be a formal homeless coalition under the Texas Balance of State Continuum of Care. So the example that I have is the South Plains Homeless Consortium. They are in Lubbock, Texas. They meet once a month and they discuss resources in their community. They talk about how to get more resources in their community, that kind of stuff. And then lastly, your housing crisis response system. So this refers to your collection of agencies that have services that serve individuals at risk of or currently experiencing homelessness. So the example for this in Lubbock, and I don't have all of the agencies on here, I have very limited space, is Salvation Army, Carpenter's Church, Paul's Project, Coronado Project, the Public Housing Authority. All of these entities are there to provide housing resources to people that are currently at risk of or experiencing homelessness. So they have a very specific job. I stole this. I'm be completely honest, we do a lot of borrowing from other people because there's a lot of really great resources out there. I borrowed this from Focus Strategies in California, and I really loved their breakdown of what a housing crisis response system is. So housing, right? The entire system is focused on housing. So all of our agencies, our primary focus is how do I get this person, regardless of what other issues they may have, into housing quickly? How do I quickly resolve their crisis, right? So, and then crisis resolution, the system understands that housing is a crisis and we are focusing on completely on resolving that crisis. So in order to meet a housing crisis, we need to provide housing. And I'll talk about housing first and how that plays into it in a little bit. And then system. So a system refers to programs and resources that work together to address homelessness, that function as a system with a common set of goals and performance measures, and the entire system's resources are deployed to meet its goals. So it's this conglomeration of agencies that focus on providing housing that really work together. They come together to make sure that they're able to solve every individual's housing crisis. A really great example of this is in San Francisco. So earlier this week, an article came out about how two providers are cost sharing to get more staff members on their on their homeless outreach team. So this is very much coming together, addressing the issue, and coming up with this common response that addresses your goals and your performance measures. Another thing that I took from Focus Solutions, I thought this was a wonderful representation of what a housing crisis response system. And you'll see how coordinated entry plays a role in that. I love that they have their vision is very clear. No one is homeless for more than 30 days. That is a HUD performance measure. And the way it works is that you have individuals experiencing homelessness, or you have individuals experiencing a housing crisis, which may mean that they're currently experiencing homelessness or at risk. They go through the coordinated entry process, which involves a very robust diversion or prevention system. So ideally, you are working with a certain percentage of people that come through your front doors and putting them either back into housing they came from or finding them alternative housing that's not part of the housing crisis response system. You're doing your common assessment with them. I'll talk about that in a little bit, but in the Texas Balance of State Continuum of Care, it is the VI-SPDAT, or the Vulnerability Index Service Prioritization Decision Assistance Tool. That took me about a year to finally figure all of that stuff out. So you're doing your common assessment, and through that common assessment, you are able to prioritize, you are able, one, to determine which housing intervention is best for this person's needs. So what is that housing intervention that will quickly address their housing crisis? And then you're also able to prioritize them as the VI-SPDAT gives you a score based off of several domains and looks at the client's acuity. And the easiest way to describe what acuity is their likelihood of dying on the streets. And then through that, we're really focusing on housing. So if we can avoid entry to shelter, that's awesome. That's what we're trying to do. We're not just trying to create a funnel into shelter. We're trying to create a funnel into housing. So you're going to have some clients that will go into shelter because diversion is potentially not an option for them. And ideally, you have other clients that can skip the shelter process altogether and go straight into housing. Coordinated entry. So this is my bread and butter. So this comes from the 2012 COC interim rule, and a couple of things that you'll notice about it is that it's extremely vague. Like all of this information that you see right here are the basic requirements of what every coordinated entry system needs to have. So it needs to have coordinate a program participant intake or access. So that's HUD also refers to that as just access. It needs to have a coordinated assessment. HUD refers to that as assess. It needs to coordinate the provision of referrals, and HUD refers to that as kind of the assignment piece of your coordinated entry system. And then in addition to that, your centralized or coordinated assessment system needs to cover the geographic area, needs to be easily accessed, and this refers to a variety of things. Ideally, your entry points aren't out in the middle of nowhere, or ideally they're on a bus line. Ideally, you're doing a lot of training with staff on cultural competency, how to work with individuals fleeing domestic violence. These are also well advertised. So individuals at risk of or currently experiencing homelessness know where to go, know which entry points to go to, but also other providers within the system are also aware of where to refer people to. And then lastly, it includes this comprehensive and standardized tool. Another thing I wanted to mention is that you'll notice I keep using coordinated entry. You'll notice on here it says coordinated assessment or centralized assessment. There are a million names for this process. I was making a list of them the other day. A lot of the more common ones are centralized intake and assessment. That is what HUD actually originally started calling this process when they released the interim rule. It's also referred to as centralized intake, centralized assessment, coordinated assessment. We used to call it coordinated access. There are a lot of communities that still call it coordinated access. And then lastly, coordinated entry. In the balance of state, we've decided to call it coordinated entry because it seems like HUD has decided after a while that that is the terminology they will be using for the system. And so we wanted to keep that parallel, very much in line with what HUD wants. I do also want to mention, so this is the extent of the guidance. This is the extent of the guidance that we've gotten from HUD, but I have been hearing over and over again over the last year that we will be getting more at some point this year, and there will potentially be a deadline attached. So I applaud you guys for joining this conversation early, and for those of you that have already started your discussion phase, great job, because I think HUD's going to be lighting the fire under us soon. So like I mentioned, HUD kind of breaks this whole process down into 3 A's. We have added an additional A, and I've also included prioritization here because I think it's a very important component of this process that at the time HUD, I think they didn't know, so they didn't include it. So access really refers to designating entry points within your housing crisis response system, and this could look a variety of ways. So in larger communities in the balance of state, like let's say Corpus Christi, it may make more sense for Corpus Christi to have 3 or 4 entry points. In another community, like Texarkana, for example, Texarkana is relatively smaller and has very few providers within its housing crisis response system, and they have opted to have 1 entry point, their emergency shelter. So access can look a variety of ways, and in the balance of state, we're really allowing communities to decide, or housing crisis response systems to decide which are the best agencies to be entry points, and we're not requiring you to have a certain number of them. So that's how this whole process has changed. For assess, it's the standardized assessment tool. I'll go into this in a little bit, in a little while. For assignment, we're creating a standardized referral process that incorporates client choice. So when I worked in East Oakland, we would have clients that would come in. I would do like a pre-assessment with them to determine if they even met our eligibility requirements, and then if they did, they would get an appointment with a case manager. If they didn't, however, I would provide them basically with a stack of papers that says, like, you can try a lot of these agencies, they may have the resources you need. And oftentimes what was happening is my clients would say, they are like, I've already tried them, they don't have any money, the clients were sharing information with me. So assignment is really critical to this process, because if instead of just blindly handing over a stack of papers or saying like maybe Catholic Charities may have that resource, we are now only making appropriate referrals. We are looking at eligibility criteria at other agencies and only referring those clients that meet those eligibility standards. For prioritization, and this is really key to this whole process, prioritization means that you prioritize people based on certain characteristics. So the reason why we chose the VI SPDAT is because that has been used over the course of at least the last 5 to 6 years through the 100,000 Homes campaign and now through 0 to 2016. And it is a tested tool that gives us a great score as to which housing intervention is ideal for clients. And then when we put this into practice, we'll be using that score to determine who is the person that most needs this intervention at this point. So for example, for permanent supportive housing on the VI SPDAT, if you score a 9 or higher, permanent supportive housing is the ideal intervention for you. However, when we break that down even further, and if we have 5 clients that have different scores, ideally we'll be picking the person with the highest score. So if I have a client out of all these 5 people that has a 15 on the VI SPDAT and they scored the highest, it's that person that we are focusing on getting into housing as quickly as possible. And then accountability. HUD doesn't talk about accountability, but we thought that it was really important to include. So it's the whole idea behind accountability is you're using data to hold entry points and coordinated entry system partners accountable, and you're also using this data to facilitate decision making when it comes to your coordinated entry system or other strategies that your housing crisis response system needs to take. So these are the 4-5 main components of a coordinated entry system. And I really love this. I've been using this for several years because I think it really does, for the visual people, I think it does a really great job of showing you what exactly we mean about kind of what does the system look like now and what will it look like with coordinated entry. So as you see, without CS, it's like a maze, trying to figure out how to get to housing. You're going to go to, clients will go to a variety of agencies trying to speak with somebody. They may get lucky and have a case manager. Them getting on a list or them getting a unit may depend on the quality of said case manager. So it's very much a system dependent on luck, honestly. When clients show up, who they get to be their case manager, that kind of stuff. With coordinated entry, you're removing a lot of that luck because your system is making very strategic decisions about who gets what. So the clients are accessing the system. It's very clear where they need to go through. They're all getting assessed with the same tool, and then we're using prioritization and assigning people to interventions. I use this all the time. I highly encourage you guys to steal this if you talk about coordinated entry in your local homeless coalition meetings. And then the goals behind coordinated entry, there are a variety of them, but the idea is that we're moving people quickly through the system. So we're being very strategic with the limited resources that we have, and we're targeting those resources efficiently, effectively, and fairly, and we're making sure that we're focusing on getting people from homelessness into housing. A lot of these, you may or may not know, are system performance measures that HUD has put out. So we want to see a reduction in the number of individuals and families who are homeless. We want to see a reduction in the number of individuals and families entering homelessness for the first time. The idea behind coordinated entry is also it's a hyper collaboration. So I have visited a lot of communities in my time at THN, and I would say that you all collaborate in that to some degree you are speaking to each other, but coordinated entry really does push it. It really requires that you're in constant communication, you're talking the same language with each other, which is why that coordinated assessment is so critical to this process. And it requires you guys to really come together and make very strategic decisions about resource allocation. And then the other thing I really love about this, and we're data nerds here at THN. Yesterday we had a really nerdy conversation about system performance measures. It's the other benefit of developing a coordinated entry system is using that data to really track what's going on in your community, to report out on it. So a lot of the data that's being created in other communities is being used for community awareness purposes. And then you're also using that data to coordinate kind of the future of your housing crisis response system, but also how agencies are speaking with each other. And ultimately, the idea is that you're using your coordinated entry system to link families and individuals with the most appropriate assistance they need to prevent and end homelessness. So we always need to really keep that in mind. So systems change. You guys, coordinated entry is a huge shift from what a lot of us are doing in our communities. Oop, I don't know why that just happened, sorry. And in order to be able to create a coordinated entry system, we need to engage in systems change. And I think this is where we didn't do such a great job with our pilot communities, I would say, in the last 2 years. So the current system is really, should we accept this household into our program? So as I mentioned with my work in East Oakland, people would show up. I was the front intake person, and we did a pre-assessment to determine, like, are they at least eligible for this program? And it's very program centric. So it's very much guarding, I think, the program. We use unique forms and assessment processes at each organization, so we're collecting a lot of different information. Every agency may have different data needs or concerns based off of where their funding comes from or what kind of research they want to do, etc. It also doesn't necessarily ensure a match between the needs and the services received. So we found that a lot with HPRP. We had a lot of clients that met our basic eligibility requirements, but when push came to shove, I don't know if rapid rehousing was necessarily the most appropriate intervention for a lot of clients. I think diversion and prevention could have been attempted first. Diversion at least could have been attempted first. And then there's also uneven knowledge about available housing and service interventions, and that is very clear in my example. I did not know anything about the resources available in the Bay Area, and I feel like a lot of other agencies also didn't know exactly what we did, so there was a lot of, I think, inappropriate referrals. So I spent a lot of my time answering phones or telling people that's not quite what we do, and I think a lot of you, as I'm saying this, are nodding your head saying, oh, we experience this definitely. So the idea is that we're moving from this system, this very program-centric system, to this future system where the central question that we're asking is, what housing or service assistance in our housing crisis response system is best for each household and quickly ends their housing crisis permanently? So again, this is not just, can my program solve their housing crisis? It's on the broad scale of what we have available in our housing crisis response system, what is the best resource for this person? So it's very client-centric and system-driven. By giving people appropriate referrals, you're reducing the amount of movement they have to do between agency and agency. You're also very aware of what resources are available at agencies at a moment's notice, so it's very much like a real-time system. You use your standard forms and assessment processes, which we talked about a lot. HUD is very clear about this. You have your coordinated referral process, which is governed through HMIS, and you have accessible information. So the information about resources in your housing crisis response system, about eligibility requirements, about intake requirements are all accessible to everybody engaging with your housing crisis response system. And you may notice this is going to take a lot of work. So I want to talk a little bit about how Houston has been doing it. I don't know a ton, but I have had the honor of presenting with Anna several times, and I actually took this from a presentation that THN did with some staff in Houston in March on coordinated entry. So what they did is they mapped their system to show kind of how is it that people are moving through our housing crisis response system. So again, I think a lot of you are going to look at this and be like, oh yeah, when I look at this, this is exactly what happened when I was working on HPRP. People were kind of getting pushed off to other providers. They were getting referred to places they probably may not have needed to go to. They were referred to agencies that didn't have any resources at the time. So it's a very scattered, very frantic kind of system. And so they did this analysis, and this is what access to housing looks like today in Houston. So Houston works a lot with their local hospitals or jails. Sorry guys, their local hospitals or jails or VA. They do coordinated outreach with their outreach teams, and then they also have their targeted hubs, or what we call entry points. And those are all ways that people can access the housing crisis response system. All of these different entry points do this common assessment form, and then through this, they match people to the appropriate housing intervention, they make a referral, or they get them on a wait list, and then ultimately that person gets into housing. So you'll notice between the two, between frantic and scattered, this one is much more strategic, thoughtful, and effective. And then Houston, and this is the slide that I really loved about this whole process, Houston also was very clear about all the work that they had to do in conjunction with the development of their coordinated entry system. So if you've attended any of our representative planning group or RPG meetings lately, we've been talking a lot about lowering barriers to housing. We've been talking a lot about adopting a housing first approach within your community. So it takes, in order to be able to implement a coordinated entry system, you really need to look at all the different pieces of the puzzle, all the different things or components that make up your system. If you're just focusing on getting coordinated entry on the ground, you're not laying the framework or the behind the scenes that makes that standardized referral system work so flawlessly, or maybe not flawlessly, but work better. And I think that's what we have, well, I don't think it, I know it. This is what we have seen in the work that we've done with our pilot communities. We came in, we said, you know, this is a coordinated entry system, this is how we're going to put it together here, but we didn't focus on any of the other work that needed to be done within the community. And I think that is why right now we have communities that are just doing the assessment and not really doing a coordinated referral process, or not looking at data to make decisions on how to scale or how to revise their system. And I wanted to share this because you'll also see that this process has taken time in Houston. So they needed to start somewhere. They started with their HMIS build out, and over time they have slowly added components. They have also slowly taken away components. I have talked to Anna about this. And the thing to keep in mind is that they're using data to make these decisions. So they're using the data that is created through the coordinated entry system to make decisions on how are we going to grow this process. So it does take time, it does take patience, it is possible. So a little bit about coordinated entry in the Texas Balance of State Continuum of Care. So late 2013, November of 2013, I was hired. We had received a grant from the Texas Department of Housing and Community Affairs, or TDHCA, and the idea was, starting in 2014, every 3 months I would travel to 4 to 5 new communities to do an orientation on coordinated entry and get them started on the implementation of a coordinated entry system. And I spent the first year on this job traveling. So I have like I don't even know, like 120 hours of flex time from that. So yeah, so I met with a variety of agencies. We had a variety of meetings. I think after the first initial pilot cohorts, we decided that we couldn't continue with the other communities that we had proposed. So the idea had been that we were going to implement in every community in the Texas balance of state. And what I was clearly seeing by going into communities was there's a lot of work that needs to get done, and in order to create a coordinated entry system that makes sense, we need to address other things. So in 2015, we implemented coordinated entry lightly in 7 different communities. And so since then, many of them have been doing assessments in HMIS, but that's kind of really where it has stopped. I've looked at the data. And so what we're trying to do now in 2016 is really focus on refining and system right-sizing. So we're looking at the data to develop a new model. We're looking at the data to figure out how can we provide guidance not only to our pilot communities, but to other communities in the balance of state that don't necessarily receive COC and ESG funding, because those are those communities that have to implement coordinated entry. How can we serve everybody well? And that this webinar is part of this process. So in refining the system, we are changing the model. There'll be more on this later. I was going to show it. I don't think now is necessarily the right time. So we will be changing the model or the workflow in HMIS. I'm starting to have meetings with our Homeless Management Information System, or HMIS team, to reorient the workflow. Sorry, that I'm getting a call right now. So we're working with the HMIS team to fix the workflow. A lot of it is based off of the work that's coming out of Pierce County, Washington. We think that they have a really smart model for how they're doing coordinated entry. So I'm really looking forward to this part in the process. We're developing documentation to assist in implementation, and we're creating documentation that'll target pilot communities who have already done some of this work, but also those communities that are kind of more in the discussion phase and haven't gotten more assistance from THN. And then in addition to this, and what I kind of gleaned from putting together this webinar, is we are going to be putting together a webinar series to help work through kind of what does it mean in the assess phase, like how can we put together our system? What are the things that we need to keep in mind when we're doing that kind of stuff? So we want to provide more opportunities for education, but also more opportunities for you guys to ask questions of us. I spend a lot of time educating myself on this and other things that pertain to homelessness and housing, and we want to share those resources with you guys. So for those of you in the discussion phase, I wanted to address this because I think it's really important. So if you're developing a coordinated entry system in the balance of state, you must at least have these 6 items. They must meet the requirements that we lay forth. So you must develop a coordinated entry transition team. I'll talk about that in a second. You must utilize the Texas Balance of State Continuum of Care coordinated entry assessment. So you cannot develop your own, create your own. We'll have one for you. You must, sorry, I'm going to turn the volume on my phone down. You must utilize the Homeless Management Information System for the assessment and the referrals. And I realize I'm talking to a lot of communities that don't have a lot of HMIS coverage, so it's going to be really important to work together on this process. You must prioritize clients as dictated by us, and there will be more guidance coming out about that. You must adhere to the Texas Balance of State COC coordinated entry performance measures. We will have those available. A lot of them are the system-wide performance, the HUD system-wide performance measures, but we are also creating ones that are specific to coordinated entry. And then you must adhere to the Texas Balance of State Continuum of Care coordinated entry policies and procedures. And it sounds like we're mandating a lot, but honestly, guys, we are allowing a lot of leeway in a lot of different areas in this process, because we realize by covering 87% of Texas that there are going to be a variety of, there are going to be communities that vary in size, so very small rural communities, larger, more metropolitan, for lack of a better word, cities. You're also going to have different strengths and challenges in each community. So we didn't want to be entirely too prescriptive like we have in the past. We wanted to really allow you guys an opportunity to come together and discuss a lot of this as a community. So how, you know, what entry or what agencies does it make sense to be entry points in Lubbock? What agencies does it make sense to be entry points in Paris, Texas? And we can talk more about this later. So I also wanted to talk to you guys about things that you can do, and there's about 9 things. In the meantime, while we're creating a lot of the materials, developing more guidance, putting together this webinar series, so the first thing is developing a coordinated entry transition team. So what this group is it's a committee. It's a committee, a subcommittee of your local homeless coalition that focuses on implementing coordinated entry within your housing crisis response system or within your community. So ideally, the committee should at minimum include the LHC president, the local homeless coalition president, housing providers, victim service providers, because they provide a very critical voice to this whole entire process, and then local political leaders. The thing that I want to emphasize is it's very important that you have the decision makers within these entities at the table. When I would come out and do orientation trainings, we had a lot of great turnout, but in a lot of instances we didn't have the people at the table who could make decisions at that meeting. And so you guys really need to make sure that you do outreach to those decision makers in your community. So for example, local political leaders, if you reach out to your mayor, if he or she cannot attend, try to get the chief of staff or somebody else that can make a decision, or that the mayor feels comfortable to make a decision for you or for him or her. Another thing you can do is adopt a housing first approach, housing crisis response system wide. So within your local homeless coalition, you should be talking about what housing first is, what does it mean to adopt housing first or a housing first approach, and you should be working with each of the providers within your housing crisis response system to adopt that approach. So an example, in Lubbock, I heard Chad Wheeler and his wife Jamie did a wonderful presentation last year at our conference about how they got housing first, permanent supportive housing in Lubbock, Texas. And the thing that I really enjoy hearing Chad and Jamie both say is that they spent a while educating themselves about housing first before they made the decision to adopt it, and they decided that at the end of their, for lack of a better word, investigation into housing first, that this was truly the most humane way to work with people experiencing homelessness. This was the most compassionate, this was the smartest, this was the most effective approach. So I highly encourage you guys to have this conversation within your local homeless coalition. Prioritization will not work if you do not have housing first in place, because prioritization depends on agencies taking clients into their housing regardless of whatever other issues that client has. So it's very important that you guys have these conversations, and as a local homeless coalition, adopt housing first as kind of the law of the land in your community. Another thing that you should do is analyze your housing crisis response system. So do something similar to what Houston did. Involve people who have lived experience in this conversation. So the things that you want to look at are, what are the resources that you have? I have found in my travels that we do a lot of concentration on what are the resources we don't have, and we don't spend enough time looking at what are the resources we do have and how can we braid them together, or how can we use them more strategically together. Another thing that we're finding, Caitlin, my coworker here, and I have traveled a bit together, and what we're finding is kind of an issue with how resources are currently being allocated. So a good example of this is in efforts to end veteran homelessness, what we've been seeing in a lot of communities is if we have HUD-VASH vouchers and a client and somebody presents as homeless and a veteran, we're just going to immediately put them into HUD-VASH. I think what we found by doing the VI Spera in Longview during the point in time count was that there are a lot of people potentially in HUD-VASH that don't necessarily need HUD-VASH. And that's really a controversial thing to say. If you want to unpack your feelings about that later, we can definitely talk about that, but HUD-VASH is a case management program that provides housing. And so therefore, that should be going to your most acute or most vulnerable clients. You should not be putting clients who, like rapid rehousing or even diversion, so lighter touch interventions, are most appropriate for. You should not be using your most expensive resources on these clients that could be served with other less expensive resources. And then while you're doing that, determine how people are currently flowing through your system, and then determine how people should flow through your system. So keeping in mind kind of this client-centered approach, minimizing the amount of work clients need to go through in order to find resources in order to address their housing crisis. How is it that we want clients to flow through? And then you guys get bonus points if you do this, attaching metrics to each step in how they should flow through the system. So if our goal is in 30 days, somebody should no longer be homeless, how long is it going to take each step of the process from identification to housing? And again, this is a lot of information. I'll provide more guidance on this later. Another thing, and this is critical, and I think this is a place where we, for lack of a better word, failed in implementation the first go around with pilot communities, is we didn't push providers to evaluate their internal flows and their policies and procedures. So I think the comic is very appropriate. Everybody wants change, but that change requires that each step in the system is being critical of their internal flow and their internal policies and procedures. So a system is a set of connected parts forming a complex whole, and so that is why it is critical for systems change to take hold in each part of the system. It's really critical that you guys analyze your internal flow and your policies and procedures. It's kind of like dominoes. I came up with this like ridiculous example yesterday. If each of you are addressing your internal issues, and let's say how long it takes to get people from homeless to housed, you're just knocking over one domino that's going to kind of make this, your current housing crisis response system fall and make a new one kind of rise out of the ashes like a phoenix. And I can just imagine my coworkers in the other room laughing at that. But I think it's really true. So really, I encourage you guys, it's hard to do, but really I encourage you guys to be, turn a mindful eye to your internal flow and your policies and procedures. Lower barriers to entry. So as I mentioned, we have talked about this quite a bit in the last few representative planning group meetings. So it's really critical, and I would encourage you guys as a local homeless coalition to do this together and acknowledge that this is a difficult process for agencies, and this process can come off as critical, but it's not. The goal is working on ending homelessness. So I encourage local homeless coalitions to gather eligibility requirements and intake materials from agencies and get these agencies together to have deliberate and thoughtful discussions about each agency's eligibility requirements. And the thing that you can think about, I heard a really great NPR story with this guy named Charles Duhigg, who looks at systems across the board. I believe he worked for Google for a while. He always uses, when he's doing system kind of evaluation, he always does what is called the 5 whys. So, for example, let's say I have an eligibility requirement that requires that people be sober upon entry. So my first question from somebody would be, why do you have that? And then go along the process until you've kind of fleshed out why that's in place and whether or not that's something that absolutely needs to be in place. Another thing that you can, another way that you can go about this is taking a look at what are those eligibility requirements that are funder mandated, and what are those eligibility requirements that we have on top of those, and can we get rid of those? So I really encourage you guys to do this. If you can standardize eligibility requirements across the board and across housing interventions within your housing crisis response system, it'll make coordinated entry incredibly easier. And we could also potentially use the eligibility functionality within HMIS, which we can't really use right now because we have a lot of very different eligibility requirements across the board. Identify entry points. So within your local homeless coalition, and I should have included this within your coordinated entry transition team, have discussions about what your natural points of entry into your system are. So natural points of entry mean where are those places that people are most likely going to go first when they're experiencing a crisis, so they've gotten an eviction notice or they're already homeless. And what we have found through the work that we're doing is that your emergency shelters are your most natural points of entry. They just are. And so I really encourage you guys to look at your emergency shelters as your entry points into your system. Identify a target population for your coordinated entry system. So are we going to focus only on those experiencing literal homelessness? Are we going to focus on both those at risk of and those experiencing literal homelessness? It's really critical that you guys kind of think of a target population while you're starting this process. We really do recommend starting small and scaling up. So a really great example of this is the work that's happening in Longview. They have effectively, in I think one meeting, put together a coordinated entry system that focuses on veterans. And they're addressing both those at risk of homelessness and those experiencing literal homelessness. Caitlin, who is our Texas Balance of State Continuum of Care program coordinator, sorry Caitlin, she and I have been working a lot together on the ending veteran homelessness stuff because it does require system change. It does require the implementation of a coordinated entry system. And there are a lot of resources out there on how to do that. So if you are interested in focusing on ending veteran homelessness in your community, please definitely reach out to us. We have been learning a lot over the course of the last several months. You can also, and I also want to mention, you can also focus on chronically homeless because they are also a very small subset of your population. The idea is that you're starting with these populations and then expanding to broader communities because the idea, or broader subpopulations, because the idea is that you guys, this system is for everybody experiencing a housing crisis, not just a certain subpopulation. So you should be, if you start small, you should be constantly trying to figure out how you're going to open it up wider and wider. Lastly, or not lastly, there's one more after this. So what you can do, number 8, you can address any challenges between community partners. Coordinated entry or THN coming in to work with your community on coordinated entry will not fix any issues between agencies. I saw this very clearly in the work that I did 2 years ago in my travels. It is imperative that you guys sit down at a table and discuss what your issues are and come up with solutions. If you do not do that, it will be very hard to develop a very strategic, transparent, effective coordinated entry system. So I really encourage you guys to think about this and work with providers that you have challenges with and figure out how you can fix those. And then lastly, add coordinated entry as an agenda item to all future local homeless coalition meetings. It is critical that you guys are constantly talking about systems improvement and the development of a coordinated entry system. And we'll be providing more information as to kind of the things that you can focus on at your local homeless coalition meetings. But I think the place that you can start is showing this webinar, or reaching out to me, and I can talk with your homeless coalition about what coordinated entry is, about what it means to develop it within your community. I am more than happy to do that. How THN will support you. So we will be a thought partner. We are here for you guys. If we do not hear from you, we do not know how to provide help. I think we're really trying to move away from us kind of coming in and suggesting a lot of things and trying to create a lot of movement. What we're really trying to do is use momentum from within the local communities to help. So I am more than happy to talk with you on the phone as long as needed, to answer any emails, to send resources, happy to review documentation, especially if you guys develop a framework for coordinated entry. I'm really happy to look at that and ask any questions. I love to ask questions. I can attend meetings virtually if needed, and then I can also provide you with a slew of resources. So we are here to support you. However, if we do not hear from you, we do not know how to support you. So I really encourage you guys to reach out to us, to reach out to me. When I was an HMIS trainer, I would say that all the time and never heard from anybody, so please do it. And ultimately, guys, the goal is the development of a system in every community that makes homelessness brief, rare, and non-recurring. It takes work. If you leave this webinar thinking it's going to be very easy and we can make it happen very quickly, you got another thing coming. But it's hard work to create a system that does these things because we don't already have systems that do that. That's why systems change is so critical. So please keep this in mind every time you meet as a coordinated entry transition team. Keep this in mind every time you meet as a local LHC. Everything that you guys do should be moving you as a local homeless coalition, as a housing crisis response system, as a community towards a future where homelessness is brief, rare, and non-recurring. It is possible. We have seen it happen through the Ending Veteran Homelessness Initiative in 23 communities and 2 states. This is possible. This is achievable. And again, we are here to support you. Any questions? Caitlin, have you gotten any questions? No. Okay, no questions. I'm going to pause here for a little bit to see if anybody's going to type any in. Hand raised. So one question that I got, so are you guys coming to Cameron County anytime soon? Michelle, the plan is to go out in the next several months. We don't have a month yet, but yes, the goal is to go. So Cameron County is part of our pilot communities. So we will be visiting the pilot communities when we do this system refining and right sizing. Will the webinar be posted? Yes, the webinar will be posted. Caitlin, hopefully press the record button. And then I will be sending out the slideshow. And I'm also going to attach resources. What have you heard from HUD about a timeline for implementing coordinated entry? Audra, nothing yet. All I have heard is that there will be a deadline. I have not heard I have no idea what that deadline may be. But as soon as I do, you guys, I mean, definitely everybody within the balance estate will be the first to find out. Yes, Caitlin, can you unmute the person that raised their hand? Please and thank you. Oh, okay. So never mind. Sorry, they put their virtual hand down. Michelle has a question. What do you recommend for a new supportive housing provider to do first off in relation to building relationships with other sources? So, Michelle, I think it's really just relationship building. So reaching out to other providers, letting them know that you are in the community. I highly encourage you, if you have not already, to link up with your local homeless coalition. If you want to message us where you are located, we can let you know what your local homeless coalition is. I think those are probably the two biggest things that you can do. Any other questions? Okay. So we are going to launch another poll. So what is your level of understanding of coordinated entry? And it's the same responses as before. We're trying to see if this has helped you guys. So awesome. So our percentages definitely have changed about 4%. I think it's probably one or two people. Still don't know anything besides the name. We have 88% of you that are familiar with the basic concepts, and then 8 of you who said that you could teach a class on it. I am here for you guys if ever you do that. Awesome. I'm so glad to hear this. And then the next one is, how are you feeling about coordinated entry? Awesome. The numbers are looking really great. So about 66% of you are excited. You can't wait to get started. About 10% are indifferent, kind of meh about it. And then 24% are overwhelmed. There's a lot to do. I'm really excited about these responses because I think it's I'm glad a lot of you are excited, and I'm not glad a lot of you are overwhelmed, but I think that you all definitely see the potential in coordinated entry. So how exciting the process is, but also the amount of work that you have to do. So awesome. We got a question. What have other communities done in regard to difficult to house people? So sex offenders, felons. Pam, I'm going to have to respond to you I'm going to have to dig a little bit about that because of the resources that are available about coordinated entry, there isn't a lot out there about how to house these particular populations through coordinated entry. They would still, you would still go through coordinated entry with them, but I think the key issue is there's probably not a lot of resources that you can refer them to, right? So, I'll definitely look that into. I can't imagine. I don't know. I will look into that. And then my email, I'm going to share it to all of you, is Sophia with a PH, SOPHIA @thn.org. Please contact me. I am more than happy to do whatever you need me to do. If you do not let me know, I can't do it. And I love helping people. So, and then I wanted to share with you guys, in the PowerPoint, I attached a bunch of resources for you. I love resources. I love hyperlinking things. I think it gets a little annoying in the office sometimes, but I think it's really important. So in regards to resources for Housing Crisis Response System, I encourage you to check out Focus Strategies. They have a series of briefs on what a housing crisis, they call it a housing crisis resolution system, but what a housing crisis response system looks like, how to become a more fluid housing crisis response system. And then I also encourage you to check out Opening Doors. Opening Doors was first released in 2010. It was the first federal strategic plan to end and prevent homelessness. In 2015, they released an amended version that I think is wonderful. I highly encourage you guys to check out the section that, let me grab my copy really quick. There's a section called Retooling the Homeless Crisis Response System, and it refers to Objective 10. I highly encourage you guys to check it out. Really great information, and again, it includes a definition and kind of strategies that you can take on in order to retool your system. I also have attached resources on coordinated entry. The policy brief was probably the last more formal thing we got from HUD. I highly encourage you to read that several times, actually. Every time I read it, I see something new. The coordinated intake and assessment infographic, I think, is a really great tool to help break down the different A's that HUD has broken coordinated entry down into. And then items that say coordinated assessment models and principles, and then also philosophy under the COC and ESG programs, I think are wonderful, very short videos on what are the different ways that you can establish a coordinated entry system, but also why is it that HUD is requiring COC and ESG programs to participate. And then the last one is a blog post from the West Virginia Balanced Estate Continuum of Care. They're doing amazing things, and their executive director, Zach, actually released a blog post. I saw it this morning on prioritization, and I thought he made some very great points about it. And then systems change. So we've been talking about this a lot. We've been really pushing it a lot, and I think I am very proud to say that I think within THN we're engaging in a lot of systems change. I think it's very much we're walking the walk. So I highly encourage you guys to check out these webinars. They are awesome. So cool. I'm such a nerd for admitting that, but they are so cool. Yeah, just watch them. I think these are really great at showing you guys the amount of work that needs to go into overhauling your system and creating a coordinated entry system. I think it's amazing to see what they have done. And if you're interested to see, one of the what you can do was really looking internally at your own processes and procedures. If you're curious as to what that process looks like and what the end can look like, I encourage you to watch the Transforming Homeless Service Systems in Pierce County, Washington. They have a really great domestic violence provider on there that completely overhauled their internal processes and procedures to the point of reducing like an 8 or 9 page intake packet into just 3 pages that is now available also online, amongst other things. A plus webinar. If there are no other questions, we're going to end the webinar. I haven't seen any other come in, and thank you, Melinda, for joining us. She said, great information, many points clarified. And then again, my email is in the chat function. If you have any questions, if you're a pilot community and you have questions, let's schedule a call. Michelle, let's schedule a call. And if you are not a pilot community, you'll know you're not a pilot community because I have not visited you necessarily in the last 2 years. Definitely reach out to me about how you can continue on with the discussion phase or get started with that discussion phase. And I don't see any other questions. So thank you guys for joining us today. I hope that you learned a lot. I hope that you can take a lot from this. And again, I encourage you to take this to your local homeless coalition and watch it during your next homeless coalition meeting. It's very important that everybody be on the same page about what exactly coordinated entry is and what systems changes and how the two play together. Thank you. Have a great rest of your week.